Every evening at exactly 5:17 p.m., a golden retriever walked onto platform 2 at the old Maple Grove train station in Ohio. He didn't bark, he didn't wander, he didn't beg for food. He simply sat and waited. The townspeople knew him. Some called him Station Dog, some called him Old Faithful. But the name that mattered was Buddy. For 10 years, through snowstorms, through summer heat, through heavy rain and bitter wind, Buddy came to that platform at 5:17 p.m. because 10 years earlier, that was the time his best friend used to step off the train. And one evening, he never did. Before I tell you what happened that day, you need to understand the kind of man Buddy was waiting for, because this story isn't really about a dog, it's about love. The kind that doesn't retire, the kind that doesn't weaken with age, the kind that doesn't stop, even when a heartbeat does. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you may find yourself thinking about someone you once waited for too. Let's go back to where it all began. Stay with me, because what happened at that station one autumn morning would change 3 lives forever. Walter Thompson was 68 years old, a retired high school history teacher. He had spent 42 years teaching young people about wars, presidents, and turning points in America's past. But in his small town of Maple Grove, Walter wasn't known for his lectures. He was known for his kindness. He waved at everyone. He remembered birthdays. He still tipped his hat, yes, an actual hat, to women at the grocery store. His wife, Margaret, often teased him. "Walter," she'd say, "you were born in the wrong century." They had been married 45 years. 45. That's longer than most careers, longer than many houses stand, longer than some towns survive. Their daughter Emily lived in Chicago now. Busy life, career, grandkids on the way, maybe someday. So it was just Walter and Margaret in their quiet, white house with the creaky porch swing and the maple tree that turned fire red every October. Retirement was peaceful, predictable. Morning coffee at 7, newspaper folded precisely, afternoon walk to the train station at 4:30. Walter liked to watch the commuters come home. He said it reminded him of the rhythm of life. Margaret thought it was just an excuse to get out of washing dishes. But then one day, everything changed. In just a moment, you'll see how a single unexpected meeting can rewrite the final chapter of a life. It was early November, cool air, leaves skittering across the platform. Walter was standing near the bench when he felt something brush against his leg. He looked down, and there he was, a golden retriever, medium size, soft eyes, a little thin, no collar, no owner. The dog didn't bark. He just stared at Walter like he'd been waiting for him. Walter chuckled. "Well now," he said softly, "you look like you've got something to say." The dog wagged his tail once, then twice, then followed Walter step for step all the way home. Margaret opened the front door. She saw the dog. She saw Walter's face. And she said exactly what wives have said for generations. "No," Walter tried reason. "He followed me. No. He's gentle. No. He needs us." Margaret folded her arms. "We are almost 70, Walter. We don't need a dog." But that night, the dog stayed on the porch. He didn't scratch, didn't howl, didn't leave, just curled up and waited. The next morning, he was still there, and something in Margaret's heart shifted. Absolutely. We'll continue gently, naturally, like someone sitting across the table telling you a story that still matters. Margaret didn't admit it right away, but the dog was already inside her heart. She just needed time to catch up with it. On the third morning, when she opened the door and saw him still there, curled up, frost on his fur, she sighed. "Walter, she said softly. "Bring him in before he freezes." Walter didn't say, "I told you so." He just smiled. And that was the day Buddy came home. They named him Buddy because that's what Walter kept calling him anyway. Well, come on, Buddy. Easy there, Buddy. You and me, Buddy. And somehow, the name stuck. At first, Buddy followed Walter everywhere. From the kitchen to the porch, from the porch to the mailbox, from the mailbox to the recliner. If Walter sat down, Buddy laid at his feet. If Walter stood up, Buddy stood up. Margaret would shake her head. "I think he thinks you hung the moon." Walter would grin. "Smart dog." But what Margaret didn't say was that she had started cooking an extra piece of chicken at dinner. She pretended it was leftovers. It wasn't. Stay with me, because what became their simple daily routine would soon turn into something no one in that town would ever forget. Every afternoon at 4:30, Walter would put on his jacket, and Buddy would already be at the door, waiting. The train station was only half a mile away, a small brick building with a wooden bench and an old clock that ticked a little too loudly. Walter liked to watch the 5:17 commuter train roll in. He said it reminded him that even when you're retired, life keeps moving. Soon, Buddy created his own ritual. At 5:10, he would sit near the edge of the platform. At 5:17, when the train arrived, he would stand. Walter would pretend to step off the train just to make Buddy excited, and Buddy would wag so hard his whole body shook. Passengers started noticing. "Is that your dog?" they'd ask. Walter would nod proudly. "Best friend I've got." But here's the thing about routines. They don't just fill time, they become anchors. And for people who have lived long lives, anchors matter. Routine becomes comfort. Comfort becomes love. And love becomes something deeper than words. Walter began talking to Buddy about things he hadn't said out loud in years. About aging, about wondering how much time he had left, about hoping Margaret would be okay if he ever went first. Buddy never interrupted, he just listened. And sometimes, that's enough. What happened next happened on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, and that's what made it so devastating. It was early spring, the kind of morning where the air still feels cold, but you can tell winter is losing. Walter finished his coffee, folded the newspaper, put on his jacket. Buddy stood at the door. But something was different. He wasn't wagging, he wasn't excited, he was blocking the door. Walter laughed softly. "Move, pal." Buddy didn't move, he whined low, urgent. Walter tried again. "Come on now." Buddy pressed against his legs. Margaret noticed. "That's strange," she said. Buddy had never acted like that before. Walter crouched down and looked him in the eyes. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'll be back by 5. Buddy licked his hand, but he didn't look convinced. Walter stepped outside. Buddy tried to follow. Margaret held him back. And that was the last time Buddy ever saw his best friend alive. Walter never made it to the train station. Halfway down Maple Street, he felt a tightness in his chest. He tried to steady himself on a mailbox, but the world tilted. A neighbor found him minutes later. The ambulance lights flashed red against the quiet houses. Margaret arrived at the hospital in silence, and by the time she reached his bedside, Walter was gone. A heart attack. Quick, peaceful, they said. At 5:17 p.m. that evening, the train pulled into Maple Grove Station. Passengers stepped off, doors closed, train departed, and on platform 2, Buddy was sitting, waiting. Of course. Take a breath with me, because this is where the story begins to settle into something deeper. Walter Thompson's funeral was held 3 days later. The church was full, former students, neighbors, the mailman, even the young barista from the cafe near the station. Margaret sat in the front pew, hands folded in her lap, staring at the polished wood of the casket. 45 years of marriage, and now she was learning how to breathe alone. Buddy stayed home that morning, at least that's what Margaret thought. But halfway through the service, someone quietly slipped into the pew behind her. It was Mr. Jenkins from the hardware store. He leaned forward and whispered gently, "Margaret, I think your dog is at the train station." Her heart sank. At 5:17 p.m. that evening, while people were still bringing casseroles to her house, Buddy was sitting on platform 2, waiting. What Buddy did in the days that followed would slowly change the entire town and reveal something about love that most of us don't understand until it's too late. The first few days, Margaret tried to bring him home. She would walk to the station, kneel beside him, stroke his fur. "It's time to go, sweetheart," she'd whisper. Buddy would follow her halfway. Then, the moment she loosened her grip, he would turn around and trot right back to platform 2 at exactly 5:17. The train would arrive, he would stand, scan the doors, and sit again. The station manager began leaving out a bowl of water. A woman from the bakery started bringing scraps. People began timing their commutes just to see him. "He's still here," they'd say, as if it was surprising. But Margaret knew what it really was. It wasn't confusion, it was faith. Buddy believed in something simple. Walter always came back, so he would keep waiting. Until he did. Weeks turned into months. Margaret stopped trying to force him home. Instead, she joined him some evenings. She would sit beside him on the bench, two grieving souls, waiting for footsteps that never came. And then the seasons began to change. And with them, Buddy. Summer came first. Hot pavement, cicadas buzzing. Buddy still arrived at 5:17. Then autumn. Leaves swirling around the platform. Margaret noticed grey hairs appearing around his muzzle. Winter was the hardest. Snow piled against the tracks. The town worried about him freezing. Someone built a small wooden shelter near the station, but even in bitter cold, at 5:17 p.m., Buddy stepped out, waited, watched. Spring returned, then another summer, then another winter. Time has a quiet way of moving forward even when our hearts stay behind. Margaret was aging too. Her knees hurt more. Her house felt emptier. Emily began urging her to move to Chicago. "Mum," she said gently over the phone, "you shouldn't be alone." Margaret looked at Buddy through the window one evening. He was sitting at the station, silhouetted by sunset, still, waiting. And she whispered something that broke her own heart. "I think he's waiting for me to let him go." Margaret made the decision in early October. The maple tree in her yard had just started turning red. Emily had come down from Chicago and packed the last of the boxes. 45 years of memories reduced to labeled cardboard. Margaret walked to the train station one final time before leaving town. Buddy was already there. Of course he was. She sat beside him on the old wooden bench. For a long time, she didn't speak. Finally, she rested her hand on his head. "You were the best thing that ever happened to him," she whispered. Buddy leaned into her touch. At 5:17, the train arrived. He stood, watched, waited. It didn't matter how many times it happened. Hope doesn't count days. When the train pulled away, Margaret stood slowly. "I have to go now," she said. Buddy looked at her, and for just a moment, it felt like he understood something she didn't. She walked away. He stayed. The town would take care of Buddy, but none of them were prepared for what would happen 3 winters later. The years were not kind to Buddy's body. His steps grew slower. His hearing faded. The golden fur that once shined in the sun turned pale and thin. But every single evening, at 5:17 p.m., he made it to that platform. People began arranging their schedules around him. Children, who hadn't even been born when Walter died, now knew the story. "Why does he wait?" they would ask, and their parents would answer softly, "Because love doesn't understand goodbye." One bitter January evening, snow drifted across the tracks. The station was quiet. A few commuters stamped their boots against the cold. Buddy walked out of his small wooden shelter, slowly, carefully. He reached his spot, lowered himself down. The 5:17 train approached, headlights cutting through falling snow. It pulled in, doors opened, closed, pulled away. The platform emptied, but Buddy did not stand up. The station manager approached first, then a nurse who lived nearby. They knelt beside him. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed, and just before he exhaled for the final time, some said his tail moved, just once, as if he saw someone walking toward him, and then he was still. Margaret came back for the burial. She was older now, thinner, but her eyes were steady. The town gathered again, just like they had for Walter. Buddy was laid to rest beside him, two simple headstones, side by side. Margaret placed her hand on the cold granite. "He kept his promise," she said quietly. And maybe that's what this story is really about. Promises we never speak out loud, routines that become sacred, the quiet ways we love each other over decades. You see, when you live long enough, you begin to understand something younger people often miss. Love is not loud. It's not fireworks. It's showing up every day at 5:17 p.m., even when the train doesn't bring anyone home. And if you've ever waited for someone, if you've ever loved someone for 40 years or more, if you've ever sat in a quiet house and listened to the clock tick, then you understand Buddy, maybe somewhere beyond what we can see. Walter stepped off a different kind of train, and maybe Buddy finally saw him walking toward him. And maybe, just maybe, the waiting stopped.